Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks, ranging from bestsellers to celebrity memoirs, news, business, and self-development. Every month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, and access to daily news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, as well as guided meditation programs. Between a full-time job in IT and a full-time job in podcasting, it gets harder and harder to sit down and read the books I'm interested in. This is where Audible comes in. I can listen on my daily commute, relaxing, or while out running errands and still get in the books I've been wanting to get into. You can download titles and listen offline anytime, anywhere. The app is free and can be installed on all smartphones and tablets. Now you can try Audible risk-free with a special 30-day free trial by visiting audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. That's audibletrial.com/nerdery and murdery. Don't let your busy life get in the way of that great book you've been wanting to read. Go get your free trial of Audible today. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. This is Jeffrey, and we've talked about many times before that I experience problems and struggles with my mental health. And really, without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy does work. It's helped for me, but what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, or you're not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's really time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles, and it's time to start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is a customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And there's a special offer to Nerdery and Murdery listeners. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. That's betterhelp.com/nerdery and murdery. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
You're listening to the sweet, sensual, and serendipitous sounds of Nerdery and Murdery.
Zig, damn it. All right, welcome to episode 48 of Nerdery and Murdery.
48. I'm Zig with your Nerdery.
And I'm Jeffrey with your Murdery. Welcome to another week's episode. Love that we have all the fans listening out there. Just going great. We are approaching a year now.
Oh.
4 episodes to go.
4 episodes to go. Can you believe it?
No, I can't. When I look at it, it's just amazing. So awesome. So before we tail off into anything else, Zig, I will turn the show over to you.
Well, awesome. Today we're going to talk about cartoons, kids.
Love cartoons.
We're going to talk about a particular animation studio known as Filmation.
Awesome.
Now, I did kind of allude to this in the Star Trek episode, the Star Trek animated series episode. I wanted to do one on Filmation just because I think they were a fascinating company.
Sure.
I loved their output, particularly in the 70s and into the 80s. Was not a big fan of their biggest hit, though.
Which was?
He-Man.
Oh, and I was a huge fan of He-Man.
I was not a big fan of He-Man.
He-Man, Transformers, I think, was Filmation. Was Transformers Filmation?
No, Transformers was, I want to say it was the in-house production company for Hasbro.
Oh, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right on that.
Just like G.I. Joe.
Yeah, that's right. Because He-Man and She-Ra were both Filmation.
Yes.
And I love both of those.
Yeah, and you know what? I've gone back and watched some of them, particularly with K3. K3 loves the old He-Man cartoons, so I watch it with K3 all the time. So
They're doing a live action, another live action of He-Man. The first one went terribly.
And Frank Langella says that was one of his favorite roles he ever played. Because,
Really?
Well, because he was in such great shape to play Skeletor, and he loved it. He thought it was great. And then when he saw the movie cut together, he's like, yeah, this is not good.
No,
my performance was all right.
It was a terrible, terrible movie. But yeah, they're doing another live action of that.
So Filmation Associates was an American production company that produced animation and live action programs for television from 1963 up until about 1991. They were located in Reseda, California. The animation studio was founded in 1962. Filmation's founders and principal producers were Lou Scheimer, Hal Sutherland, and Norm Prescott. Lou Scheimer is the voice of Orko.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you will you may not know his face, but you will recognize his voice. Lou Scheimer and Filmation's main director, Hal Sutherland, met in 1957 while working at Larry Harmon Pictures on the made-for-TV Bozo and Popeye cartoons. Eventually, Larry Harmon closed the studio. By 1961, Scheimer and Sutherland went to work at a small company called Trueline, one of whose owners was Marcus Lipsky, who then owned Ready Whipped Cream. SIB Productions, a Japanese firm with U.S. offices in Chicago, approached them about producing a cartoon called Rod Rocket. The two agreed to take on the work and also took on a project for family films owned by the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod for 10 short animated films based on the life of Christ. Paramount Pictures soon purchased SIB Productions, and Trueline staff increased, including the arrival of former radio disc jockey Norm Prescott, who became a partner in the firm, and he had already been working on an animated feature of Pinocchio in outer space, which was primarily produced by Bell Vision Studios.
Yeah, Pinocchio in outer space.
Yes, Pinocchio in outer space. If you've never seen it, it's really kind of weird.
Okay, it sounds weird.
They eventually left Trueline, and Scheimer began working on commercials, including commercials for Gillette and others, which is where Filmation began. Little animated bits and commercials back in the 60s. They were doing a lot of that stuff. He met lawyer Ira Epstein, who worked for Harmon but had left the firm and now put together the new corporation with Scheimer and Sutherland. It officially became known as Filmation Associates as of September 1962, so named because they were working on film but doing animation, so putting them together yielded Filmation. Both Rod Rocket and the Life of Christ series credited Filmation Associates with production design. In addition, Scheimer and Sutherland as directors, SIB Productions, whose logo bore resemblance to the original Filmation logo designed by Ted Littlefield, who would soon go on to become Sib Tower 12 Productions, and produce the first few Chuck Jones, Tom and Jerry films for MGM, until becoming MGM Animation and Visual Studios for the remainder of those films. Norm Prescott bought in Filmation's first major project, Journey Back to Oz, an animated sequel to the MGM film The Wizard of Oz in 1939. Begun in 1962, storyboarding, voice recording, and most of the music scoring and animation had been completed when financial challenges caused the project to be put on hold for nearly 8 years. In the meantime, the new Filmation studios turned their attention to more successful mediums, network television. For the next few years, they made television commercials, little animated bits. Some other projects for the companies made an unsuccessful pilot film for the Marx Brothers cartoon series, which you can find every once in a while. They also tried to develop an original series named The Adventures of Stanley Stoutheart, later renamed Yank and Doodle, about a boy and a dog, but they were never able to sell it and almost closed down until approached by DC Comics editor Mort Weisinger to do a Superman cartoon. They premiered on September 10th, 1966, and was followed by several of these other DC superheroes. And then in 1968, the first Archie show. So a lot of the stuff in the late 60s, in the early 70s, the Batman series, the Superman series, there was an Aquaman series, there was a Teen Titans series, all done by Filmation. You don't see them a lot anymore because Hanna-Barbera then went on to do Super Friends in the early to mid 70s, and that kind of eclipsed all the stuff that Filmation was doing.
And correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it's in your notes, I don't know if it is or not, but isn't Filmation now based here?
Filmation doesn't exist anymore.
They don't. We have an animation studio.
Oh, Funimation.
Funimation. Okay.
Funimation. Yeah, they do a lot of anime stuff.
Got it.
Yeah,
okay.
a lot of dubbing. They also do some of their own stuff.
Got it.
But yeah, that's Funimation. And yes, they are based in Las Colinas, and they're always
I knew there was one.
They're always looking for voice work. So maybe we can get a gig over there sometime.
Doubtful, but whatever.
So both those series greatly helped Filmation's popularity to increase in the 1970s, when it scored big with several of those DC comic series. Filmation Studio was purchased by the Teleprompter Corporation in 1969, which was then owned by Westinghouse Electric Corporation. It got control of Filmation outright in 1981, but they left Filmation alone to do what they do. Now, Filmation's last production was the feature film Happily Ever After, a sequel to the story of Snow White, released in theaters 5 years later in 1993. So that was the last thing that Filmation did. Also, at the time of closing, 2 new animated series, Buzzberg, a spinoff of Pinocchio and the Emperor of the Night, concerning insect characters who had shown up in the movie, and Bravo, a spinoff of Brave Star, were beginning production, but I don't think they ever finished. So Westinghouse sold Filmation's library to Paravision International, which was owned by the French cosmetic company L'Oreal. Before the sale was complete, Westinghouse shuttered the film studio in February 3rd, 1989, and which left L'Oreal with owning the Filmation library. That they didn't release stuff for a long time. You couldn't get your hands on anything that was Filmation for years, because L'Oreal didn't know what to do with it, because they were a makeup company. But as with other producers of Saturday morning cartoons, Filmation was more concerned with quantity rather than quality. So let's talk about quality. Filmation has a specific style. At the time, it had a reputation for exploiting the technique of limited animation to produce a number of animated series with a distinct look. Again, the Filmation style is you start with a shot on a background that you play jungle sounds on, and with music, and you pan very slowly across it. Well, that's not actually animated. All they're doing is just moving a really long picture in front of a camera. They also used a bunch of rotoscoping in later years, beginning with Tarzan and the Flash Gordon series. The Flash Gordon series, what they did with that, and they eventually produced a movie, an animated movie, which ran on NBC, on an NBC night at the movies in like 1982 or so. There was also a series. The movie was the series kind of coupled together. The movie is better than the series itself. But in comparison to the live action Flash Gordon film, it's 10 times better, because they actually used a bunch of the drawings from the old Flash Gordon cartoons. So the Hawkmen look like Hawkmen, and Flash Gordon's wearing the right outfit, But they used the series used the animated sequences over and over, many times, to the point where Filmation style is instantly recognizable. One example of this can be seen in She-Ra and He-Man's transformation sequences. They use the same transformation for He-Man every single time.
Right.
And they only filmed it once. So it was really easy to, every time he picked up the sword and went, "I have the power," they just used that same bit, and they used it over and over again. Filmation's animation often looked poor quality due to the limited number of frames per second. They went fewer than the standard 24 frames per second. They actually went to like 22, which results in it looking a little jerky. And they say cheap looking, but Filmation, the animation style itself is a little rough, but the actual artwork is beautiful. You never have to worry about bad art in Filmation. Like the actual stills and the backgrounds, they're beautiful. They're almost as good as Ruby Spears, who was working with Hanna-Barbera at the time. But that Filmation style, like in Star Trek, when they would have the characters put their hand over their mouth to talk so they didn't have to animate their lips. and the use of stock footage. They used it to save money, but at the same time, a lot of other studios were exporting their actual animation to Korea or Japan, whereas Filmation still did their animation in-house. It didn't leave. So they had to do these other things to make it more cost-effective to do the animation. And they also do a lot of rapid jump cuts during action sequences. And of course, the long establishing shots. Filmation also pioneered other animation technology, particularly in Flash Gordon, which included backlighting effects for the first time in American animation. So they would put the cells on a light board. So like when Ming the Merciless walks out of his little curtain of light, that's actually what's going on. There's actually, that cell is on top of a digital screen. And they were the first to do that in America. Now, Japan was already doing it, but it really looks cool if you sit and go back and look at that. They later used that in He-Man and She-Ra. And they pioneered a unique method of generating 3D vehicle animation by filming white outline black miniatures against black backgrounds using a computerized motion control camera and high contrast film. Then they printed the negatives onto acetate frame by frame to create animation cells that they then hand painted. This produced a three-dimensional effect that had been used by Disney in such films as 101 Dalmatians. And it predates the modern use of 3D computer animation. The vehicles in 2D animation productions, however, had a distinctive flicker because some of the painted lines went in and out of visibility. So again, you get that little flicker. But unlike many American studios, Filmation never relied on animation studios outside the United States. So they didn't want to produce in Asia. They wanted to have it in-house. Now, characters and plots were typically run-of-the-mill for the time. For example, most episodes of one show that they did do that was not a different priority or property was Ghostbusters. Not the original Ghostbusters.
The real Ghostbusters.
Yes.
Right.
They had the scheme. The bad guys develop an evil plan. The heroes are needed, but always absent. Ghost Bucky, the talking car, complains about the dangerous position, and Tracy the gorilla pulls out of his backpack exactly what the Ghostbusters need. Ghostbusters was voiced by Larry Storch and, oh my God, I can't remember the two guys from F Troop.
Larry Storch and Ken Berry?
Yes, thank you. So, and it ran for a long time. The trademark problem when they made the Ghostbusters movie, they actually had to pay Filmation a little bit of money to use the name because the Filmation.
Oh, that's right. They were just called the Ghostbusters. It was the actual cartoon that was based on the movie that was called The Real Ghostbusters.
Yes,
that's right.
Yeah, because the guys who produced the movie had to give Filmation the rights to use the name Ghostbusters.
I'd forgotten about that. I had it backwards.
Now, the trademark of the company Filmation, it's three names that spin around the Filmation logo. You see a lot, Black Star is the best one. And it was the three producers who owned the company. And the thing was, nobody wanted their name on top. So they did it like that until everybody left. And eventually it was just Norm Prescott. Or, I'm sorry, Lou Scheimer, not Prescott. Now, the Filmation production credited only Lou Scheimer with his signature, starting with Gilligan's Planet in 1982. Many of its series produced in the production of the later 70s and 80s are notably for imparting a simple moral or life lesson at the end of the series because they were coming under fire because they were saying the cartoons were too violent. So they would do a moral of the story. And a great quote from J. Michael Straczynski, because he was writing for He-Man at the time of Babylon 5 fame, says, what's great is you'd have this great action sequence and Skeletor gets away and then you cut to He-Man and he says, and the moral of the story this week is look both ways before you cross the street. He was like, it was awful, but we had to do it. So,
well, they often, they came to that moral after commercial break. They would have commercial break and they would come back and have that final little scene where it was this week's moral. And very often it didn't have anything to do with the story.
Look both ways before crossing the street. They created very few original animated characters. Again, you had the Ghostbusters. You had Frady Cat, who was a timid feline who lost 8 of his 9 lives. And Wacky and Packy, a caveman and his pet mammoth. And they originally aired on segments of Uncle Croc's Croc Block on ABC, hosted by Charles Nelson Riley as Uncle Croc. This period of comedy and cartoons was heavily scrutinized for violence, and many shows duplicated the popular Scooby-Doo format. Filmation's strong point was his adaptive popular television series, movies, and other works, although at least one series, Mush, the third animated segment on Uncle Croc's Block, was not a direct adaptation, but inspired by the film MASH. So the dogs were the doctors. It was ridiculous. Now, I kind of want to talk about Filmation's live action stuff. The Hardy Boys and Archie's Funhouse featured live action footage with an audience watching the band perform. And the Fat Albert's Kids segment featured Bill Cosby. And of course, there was the Kids Superpower Hour with Shazam, where you had animation and live action. Filmation made 6 fully live action series, including Space Academy, its spinoff Jason of Star Command, Arc 2, Shazam, The Ghostbusters, and The Secret of Isis. Secret of Isis and Shazam used to run not only on Saturday mornings, but occasionally you would get them on the Friday night movie of the week on CBS here. Forrest Tucker. That was the other actor. Sorry. Filmation's produced a live-action series called The Ghostbusters, starring former F Troop stars Larry Storch and Forrest Tucker.
Forrest Tucker. Okay.
Yes.
Forrest Tucker was the sergeant.
Yeah. And science fiction fan and collector Bob Burns was Tracy the gorilla. And they were paranormal investigators. Space Academy, which was established in the year Stardate year 3732, is a space academy located on an asteroid, brought together the best of young minds, including several with special skills and abilities to explore the mysteries of space. You had Commander Isaac Gampu, who was Jonathan Harris, Chris Gentry as Rick Carrot, Adrian Price Jones as Maggie Cooper, and Paul Jerome is played by Ty Henderson. Much of the children's television of the 70s, lessons and morals were taught in each episode of Space Academy. But Space Academy was a little more heady, so they did a spin-off of Space Academy called Jason of Star Command. Now, Jason of Star Command was a segment of Tarzan and the Super 7, which was done in the style of a movie serial. So they would show a part of a Jason of Star Command episode, and then a cartoon, and then another part of the Jason of Star Command episode, and they would always end on a cliffhanger. The second seasons were standalone half-hour series of Jason of Star Command. The series revolved around the exploits of Space Commander Jason, Craig Littler, and his colleagues, including Professor E.J. Parsfoot, Charlie Dell, and his pocket robot Wiki. The series also starred Sid Haig as the evil Drago, and in the first season. And in the second season, James Doohan, who basically ran Star Command. So you got Scotty back for this one. Now both James Doohan left the series at the end of the first season to join the rest of the original Star Trek crew in the motion picture. He was replaced by John Russell, who played a blue-skinned by the book Commander Stone. The asteroid prop used for Space Command or Space Academy was also used for Jason of Star Command because they were out of the same place. After the first run episodes were showed on CBS during the fall lineup of CBS Saturday mornings, Jason of Star Command was replaced by Shazam in January of 1980. Shazam ran for, I want to say, a season, and then they got Shazam and Isis, and they ran for another season. But you could also see them on our local CBS station at night. I loved the live action series. Those were actually my favorite. That and one of the animation shows, Black Star.
Loved Black Star.
Black Star. And that's the reason I don't like He-Man, because they basically used a bunch of the backgrounds from Black Star and a lot of the story.
thought He-Man came out first.
No, Black Star came out first. Black Star was on for about a year and a half, and they were going to do another season, and the toy company came to them and said, hey, we want to do a movie. And he's like, why don't we do a series? We're not going to produce a second season of Black Star. We can use a lot of the same backgrounds and save some money. So Black Star was an American animated science fiction television series produced in 1981 by Lou Scheimer and Norm Prescott for Filmation. The series was Filmation's super epic fantasy, or the series was Filmation's second fantasy epic, the first being The Freedom Force, which was a segment of Tarzan and the Super 7. And if you could find the Tarzan and the Super 7 stuff, go back and watch it. It's just great. It's great stuff. Yes, the animation's a little jerky, but it is just as good as the old Herculoids episodes, and I love the Herculoids episodes. And when I say Herculoids, I mean the Herculoids. You're welcome. John Blackstar, circling back, as we do. John Blackstar is an astronaut from Earth stranded on the planet Sagar after a spaceship was swept into a black hole, taking him into an ancient alien universe. On Sagar, Blackstar allies himself with the Trobbits, the shape-changing clone, and the dragon Warlock, and Mara the Enchantress. Blackstar and his allies oppose the Overlord, who seeks to take over Sagar. Sagar you can rule Sagar with the two halves of the Power Sword. You got the Star Sword and the Power Sword. Overlord has the Power Sword, and John Blackstar has the Star Sword. And ever so often they get the two together, and either one of them has it, but they always have to break them back up and split them up. And that's basically how that show ran. John Blackstar was originally supposed to be African American, which was Lou Scheimer's intent. He wanted a black superhero on Saturday morning cartoons to go along with the Cosby Kids. So, now Blackstar's fate in the 6th episode Space Wreck. Blackstar was briefly reached by his former Earth girlfriend, Lieutenant Katana, who spent some time on Sagar before a misadventure with the Overlord forced her to leave. Katana did not appear in any other episodes, although the story ended with her asking a superior for permission to organize an arm rescue mission to go and get Blackstar. So because they didn't do a second season, the assumption is she was able to come back from Earth and rescue Blackstar from Sagar. Now, He-Man. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe is an American animated television series produced by Filmation based on Mattel's toy line Masters of the Universe. The show is often referred to simply as He-Man, and it was the most popular animated show of the 1980s. It made its television debut in September of 1983. See, this is where, because Blackstar was 81.
I'm with you.
And ran until 1985, consisting of 2 seasons of 65 episodes each. Toward the ends of the show's original run, it spawned one feature-length theatrical movie, He-Man and She-Ra, and the Secret of the Sword, which served as the introduction to the show's spin-off literal sister series, She-Ra, Princess of Power. Reruns continued to air in syndication until 1988, at which point USA Networks bought the rights to the series and aired He-Man until September of 1990. The success of the toys based on the show and syndication greatly influenced other animation houses to produce half-hour cartoon commercials and considerably changed the syndication.
Well, that's what I was going to say, too, because really, each week of He-Man was really what were they going to be debuting in the stores that week?
Yes.
Which was the new toy?
Yeah. What's the new toy?
Yeah, if there was a new He-Man action figure coming out that week, guarantee he was in that week's episode.
Oh, who is this? Oh, that's Fisto.
Yeah, that's Fisto, Tornado Man, Beast Man. You know, all the funny names that came along with that.
Stinkor.
Yes.
Now, despite the limited animation techniques they were used to produce the series, He-Man was notable for breaking the boundaries of censorship that had severely restricted the narrative scope of children's TV programming in the 70s. For the first time since Ruby Spears' Thundar the Barbarian, a cartoon series could feature a muscular superhero who was actually allowed to hit people. And yes, Thundar the Barbarian hit people a lot.
Yes.
Ariel, Oogla, ride! We will talk about Thundar the Barbarian at some point. The show was so successful that it spawned the spin-off series She-Ra, Princess of Power. Now, they tried to relaunch He-Man's toy line, and there was a New Adventures of He-Man in early 1990s. and they've done an update recently. He-Man was also noted for featuring early script writing works from J. Michael Straczynski, Paul Dini, and Brent Stevens, both of whom would go on to write acclaimed episodes of Batman the Animated Series, Beast Wars story editor Larry DiTillo and David Wise, and later the head writer of the TV version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and The Real Ghostbusters. In 2016, a new episode of He-Man was released. But that's basically it for Filmation, other than get out there and go check out. If you can find the Tarzan and the Super 7, go check them out. A lot of this stuff now is on Tubi and IMDb. Not just He-Man, but like I was watching Black Star a few weeks ago. And of course, Star Trek, the animated series, which we've discussed before. The Flash Gordon series you can go and pick up. I don't know if you can see the movie. I want to say you can. It's like 2 hours, but basically they took the 50 episode series and shrunk it down into a movie, and it's actually better as a movie because there's a lot of repeating things in the series because that's what Filmation did. That they just cut out, that you just see it once. So it tells the story a little better.
I enjoyed Filmation stuff as a kid. I enjoyed all of it.
Yeah.
Cartoons were a big thing for me in the 70s and the 80s. And Filmation was a part of it. I loved I loved He-Man and She-Ra.
Let's coin that phrase.
He-Ra.
He-Ra.
But I also liked Black Star.
Yeah.
So I was a fan of all of those.
I think I was mad because they didn't finish Black Star. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that's basically why I didn't really like He-Man. Like I said, I've gone back and watched it with K3, and the show's great. Yeah. I mean, I'm watching the jump cuts and we're talking about it, but like those long establishing shots, I love those. Mm-hmm. I love those as a kid. Mm-hmm. They're just beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I love Filmation stuff, so definitely get out there and definitely check those out just to see things that we watched as kids. So
yes,
great stuff. Cool. Well, then with that, I guess we'll step over to the murdery side of the house.
Murder.
For my episode today, I got my sources from All That's Interesting, Investigation Discovery, Wicked Attraction, Season 3, Episode 2, Home Sweet Home. Oxygen.
Well, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. Oxygen True Crime, and Murderpedia. And today my story is over Shelly Knotek.
Shelly Knotek.
So Michelle Shelly Knotek appeared to leave a very charmed life. She had a caring husband by her side, and she was raising 3 daughters in a home in rural Raymond, Washington. The couple was very known for their selflessness, and they invited struggling friends and relatives to come and live with them. But then those guests started to disappear. The first person to vanish in the Knotek care in Knotek's care was her old friend Kathleen Loreno. She had lived together in Shelley's home for 5 years before she disappeared in 1994. And Shelley assured anyone who asked that Kathy had simply started a new life elsewhere. She said this when 2 other people vanished from her home too. Finally, how this all came out is Shelley's 3 daughters bravely came forward with their harrowing tale. All 3 of them had been physically abused by their parents, and guests were killed. They said Shelley had starved, drugged, and tortured her victims, forced guests to jump off the roof, drenched their rooms in bleach, and made them drink urine. So, while Shelly Knotek has been in prison since 2004, she is chillingly set for release this June in 2022, with her daughters terrified of what could happen next, and you'll see why as we go through. Born on April 15, 1954, Michelle Shelly Knotek never strayed too far from her hometown of Raymond, Washington, and not even her 18-year prison stint has taken her further than 2 hours north of where she was born. Her parents had a very volatile relationship and would also constantly fight, which led to divorce. The oldest of 3 siblings, Shelley was raised by an alcoholic mother who seemingly abandoned her kids. Shelley would never see her mother again once she left. Unable to process her grief, Shelley tormented her younger brothers. But her behavior truly became concerning when she was 13 and learned that her mother hadn't abandoned them at all and was actually beaten to death by her boyfriend. Shelley blamed her father for believing that if he had never divorced her mother, that her mother would not have been killed by the boyfriend. Well, duh.
No.
According to her daughter, Shelly Knotek responded to the news of the death with pyromania, theft, and filling her own shoes with glass. She wasn't all there, I don't think.
No. Filling her own shoes
Her
with
own
glass.
shoes with glass.
Okay. I'm with you.
After falsely accusing her father of rape at 15, Shelly was sent to live with her grandmother before she eloped with her first husband, Randy, at 17. Those closest to her claim that after being initially charmed by her, all three of her successive spouses suffered under her physical and emotional cruelty. Her good looks and charm made her popular with men. The honeymoon, though, with Randy didn't last long as her violent mood swings proved to be too much. So soon, after daughter Megan was born, the marriage was over. She then meets Merlin, a custom car painter who became husband number 2. It tickled me, too, that she actually ran into someone named Merlin. She has her second daughter, Dana, that's born to her and Merlin. And this marriage was also volatile, and Merlin soon tired of her. And she really became manipulated to these men, and it was either put up with it or leave. And the first two chose to leave. In 1987, Shelly married her third and final husband, David Knotek. He was a construction worker and Navy veteran whom Shelly routinely abused. He was twice divorced and had 2 daughters of his own, 12-year-old Nikki and 9-year-old Sammy. But his new wife became more sadistic as time as time went on, and David really never saw the dangers ahead. Mm. His very religious family were pushing him to get married and have a full family, and he was enthralled with Shelly's girls and looked to it as having an instant family. So they soon bought a remote farmhouse to restore. But Shelly would soon start showing her true face, and she began manipulating David, demanding his paycheck and giving him only a tiny allowance because she wanted to make sure he knew that she was now in charge. At first, David objected to her extreme punishment of the children, but eventually his resistance faded. Shelly would tell him that David needed to discipline him and that he could be very harsh. He did this because he believed if he didn't do it, that Shelly would be even harsher to the girls. Megan later revealed that her stepfather could be equally cruel when pressed into action by her mother, and punishments were severe. Shelly's first victim moved into their home in 1988, and this was her 13-year-old nephew, Shane Watson, whose father was in jail and his mother was too destitute to take care of him. Shane's father was in a motorcycle gang, and he was in and out of prison, while Shane's mother was also in and out of jail and abusing substances. So he had nowhere to go, and Shelly claimed to be the stabilizing force he needed and invited him to come live with them. Shelly took to torturing Shane almost immediately, and he became the focus of her abuse. She dubbed her style of reprimanding him as wallowing, which she employed for things such as him going to the bathroom without asking.
What?
Mm-hmm. She even ordered him to stand outside naked in the cold and dumped water on him.
In Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And he wasn't allowed to eat proper food or go outside unless he was supervised. And when some of the punishments, he would be forced to do calisthenics in the mud and the rain in his underwear. And his suffering would only ease once Kathy Loreno moved in. However, he was then forced to become one of Kathy's tormentors. So she's forcing the kids to do her bidding for her. The Knotek sisters weren't spared either. She mocked her eldest 2 stepdaughters by casually ordering them to give her handfuls of their pubic hair. Their wallowing often included being caged in a dog kennel. She even shoved Nikki's head through a glass door one day and then turned around on her and said, "Look what you made me do." The only one that seemed to be spared, though, was the infant Tori, who was born later after Shane moved in. Meanwhile, she forced her nephew and Nikki to dance naked together. She laughed. And then what she would do is, after she would do these times of punishment, sometimes the kids would run away and she would catch them, and then she would love bomb them. She would just tell them, "I'm so sorry, that won't happen again. I love you so much. Here's some presents. Here's some food. Here's some clean clothes." She would literally love bomb these kids with affection in order to get them to trust her again. And
So she could torture them.
So she could then turn around and torture them. Absolutely. So Kathy Loreno was welcomed in the home in December of '88. She had been a hairdresser in town, and she was described as a real nice gal. She was very quiet and to herself. She ended up being promoted to the manager of a national chain of salons, but then she would lose her job due to problems with the chain. And she had had a blow up at home where she lived with her mother, and so she moved out, finding herself without a home or a job. Shelly knew Kathy from the salon, so she offered Kathy a place to live. And Shelly was pregnant at the time with Tori, so she asked Kathy to come live with them and help Shelly through the pregnancy. Kathy soon became an extended part of the family, and she joined in celebrations, and they showed her on video, filming her just like she was one of the family and embracing her as that. However, as we talked earlier, Shelly could be loving and caring 1 minute, but violent and unpredictable in the next. She'd play mind games with her children, like steal pages out of their homework and then send them to school to get in trouble with their teachers. They would get in trouble when they got home because they didn't have their homework. But she was the one stealing them.
Just to cause chaos.
Mm-hmm. She would then wait for them to come home, and she'd berate them. She'd call them stupid. Sometimes she'd lock them in a closet with only stale food to eat. I
have dealt with people like that. They will intentionally sabotage something just so they could point fingers at somebody else and berate them.
It's awful.
Yeah, it's
awful.
Sociopathic.
Oh, absolutely, she is. Other times she'd wake them up and send them outside in the dead of winter in their pajamas to be hosed down and roll around in the mud like they were pigs.
Good Lord.
When Kathy moved in, she soon discovered that she didn't have a new friend, but she was now a new target. Shelly would feed Kathy rotten food as punishment to weaken her mentally as well as physically. Kathy would sometimes be kept half-starved and at times been made to crawl on the floor. And once she locked Kathy for days inside of a deep well.
Okay. Kathy's an adult, right?
Mm-hmm. But she's been traumatized. She was kicked out of her home. She was welcomed in. They gave her affection. They showered her with affection. They made her part of the family before all this started. And Shelly had a way of making people believe it was their fault.
Yeah.
That what was happening to them were their fault. And Kathy was scared, and she was too traumatized and reluctant to run away, because it's the psychological mind games. She was a part of this family, and they brought her in. And even though there's this torture, in a sick way, this is still a place of love.
Yes.
And so that's part of why she was very hesitant to run away. It did get bad for Kathy. Shelly told the kids that they had to hit Kathy, punch her, stab her in the legs with scissors. And they would tell the kids that unless they wanted it to happen to them, they needed to punish Kathy. The normally tender-hearted Shane would become a reluctant, brutal enforcer. He had a set of steel-toed boots that he would kick Kathy in the head with. And this really had a very specific purpose. Not only did the kids feel bad about having to do this, but they were also unlikely to go tell people about it because now they were involved in the abuse. They were part of it, yeah. Right. So they weren't telling anybody.
You can't tell on me because you did it too.
Right. And Kathy had nowhere to go. She didn't have anywhere to go over this farm, so she would be perform forced labor in the nude. She was being fed nightly sedatives and was left sleeping next to the basement boiler. So she was just put in depraved conditions. And again, the punishments would increase until somebody would try to escape. One of the kids would try to escape. Shelly would bring them back. She'd do the love bombs, and then soon the abuse would start up and start all over again. Well, Shelly soon grew tired of Kathy, and she had her locked up in the old pump house. By 1994, Kathy had really become a ghost of her former self. By this time, she had lost more than 100 pounds, and she'd become weak because her diet was so poor. Mm-hmm. She was also having problems with her balance from being repeatedly struck in the head and kicked. And finally, one day, after Shelly beat her, she died.
Shelly beat her to death.
Beat her to death. David, her husband, did carry her to the laundry room and began trying to revive Kathy. Secretly, while that was happening, Shane took some photos of Kathy, of this happening and Kathy's body in the hopes of showing them later to police for his protection. Shelly then wanted to get rid of the kids, so she took them totally out of the area to a motel 45 miles away and left them there overnight. And then Shelly convinced David that they'd all be incarcerated if they told outsiders, so David Knotek then burned Kathy's corpse in the backyard. He built a fire pit and torched her. Shelly told the kids that Kathy died of natural causes and that they better remember that. She told them that if police blamed Shelly for Kathy's death, that she would kill them and she would then kill herself and David. So the children lived in fear that if they came forward, that they themselves would die. If anyone asked, Shelly simply explained Kathy had run off with her lover, a trucker that Kathy had left with years earlier, and she even offered police proof that Kathy had run off by producing a photo with Kathy standing with a male in front of a semi-truck. She said Kathy had run off to California where she was being a nanny. Shane, though, he really was starting to see that something needed to happen. So
he'd taken pictures too.
He'd taken pictures, and he showed these pictures to Nikki. He showed some of when Kathy was still alive, when she was still horribly malnourished, and then showed photos of her dead body. And he said, "I'm going to take these to the police." Nikki was so scared she told his mother about the plan, and then Shane disappeared. As he was getting bigger and stronger, Shelly could no longer control Shane. But she told everyone that Shane was a runaway and decided to go to Alaska and work on a fishing boat, which was very common for young boys who weren't going to college, and you'd not hear from him for 6 to 8 months. So this didn't raise the alarm for anybody.
Well, they could go, like those crab fisher guys. A lot of those guys come out of Washington State. They go up there and they work for 35 days and come back with $50,000.
Right. Unfortunately, what really happened was David Knotek shot Shane in the head in February of 95 and then disposed of his body by burning the body and scattering the remains in the ocean. He thought that with Shane gone, nobody would be able to say anything to the authorities. Sammy Knotek later reported, "The reason why my mom was able to control Dave was because while I love him, he's just a very weak man. He has no backbone. He could have got happily married and would have been an amazing husband to somebody because he really would have been, but instead he just got his life ruined too." The 2 older daughters realized they now could return to being targets themselves and decided to run away, which left younger sister Whitney and Tori behind. And before justice found them, the Knoteks took one more victim. As they had an empty room to fill with the older girls out of the house, they brought in Shelly's friend Ron Woodworth, who moved in 1999. Ron was a 57-year-old veteran with a drug problem, and he was a newcomer to town coming from California, and he didn't have any local friends or family besides Shelly. She met him while working as an assistant nurse for a senior service, or he was working as an assistant nurse for a senior service where Shelly was a case manager. But he really wasn't doing well in his job. He had his hours cut, and he was having financial problems. He had his home repossessed, so Shelly said, "Hey, come on and come live with us."
Case management?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ironic, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Shortly after settling in, he was berated by Shelly as being an ugly lowlife who could use a steady diet of pills and beatings to get his life together. Everything in his life was restricted. His food, and even when he could use the bathroom, was restricted. He wasn't even allowed to use the bathroom and instead was forced to go outside. And then she would make him go out in the yard and do work barefoot. Meanwhile, in 2002, Shelly Knotek took care of James McClintock, who was an 81-year-old retired merchant crewman. McClintock reportedly willed Shelly his $140,000 estate once his black lab Sissy died. Perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not, McClintock died from a head wound he allegedly suffered after falling in his home. However, police were not able to ever successfully link Shelly to his death. Kind of think they missed one there.
Yep.
Back at home, Shelly demanded that Ron would cut ties with his family, forced him to drink his own urine, and then jump off the roof. He didn't die from falling from the two-story, but he was badly injured, so she poured bleach over his wounds, and then in August 2003, he succumbed to his injuries. Shelly called David at work and told him that Ron was jumping out of trees trying to kill himself and that he finally succeeded, but an autopsy report would later reveal that Ron had died from physical abuse, neglect, and numerous blunt force injuries to his body. So people would come by and ask about Ron, and his corpse was sitting in their freezer, but she said that he had left and got a job in Tacoma. David Knotek eventually buried him in their yard, but it was Ron's disappearance that now led 14-year-old Tori to realize what was happening in her family. As all the sisters had moved out by this time, Tori told them what she believed had happened. They urged her to gather Ron's belongings so that they could make their cases to authorities, in which she did. Police then investigated the Knotek property in 2003 and found Ron's buried body. They arrested David immediately, but Shelly was nowhere to be found. They did track her down at another family property a few miles away, and she's promptly arrested as well. While Tori was placed into her sister Sammy's custody, David Knotek confessed to shooting Shane Watson and burying Ron Woodworth 5 months later. He admitted that Kathy had died from being tortured, abused, wasted away, and eventually choked to death on her own vomit. He did admit to trying life-saving measures on Kathy, but nothing worked. He further admitted to being the one to dispose of Kathy's body by burning it in a fire pit, and then he scooped up all the ashes and dumped them in the ocean. He was eventually charged with second-degree murder for shooting Shane Watson, and he served 13 years. He's now free. Michelle Knotek, meanwhile, was charged with second-degree murder and manslaughter for the deaths of Kathy Marino and Ron Woodworth, respectively. She entered an Alford plea for her role in the killings of Kathy and Ron, which she still maintains her innocence. Again, as a reminder, an Alford plea is one where you say, no, I'm not guilty, but you have enough evidence against me that I see that a jury is going to put me away. So you do that plea for a lesser charge. She was sentenced to 22 years with no possibility of parole, but again, she's scheduled for release in June of this year, 2022. Her family is said to be very deeply concerned about her release. Sammy said, if she ever turns up on my doorstep, I can just see myself locking all my doors and barricading myself in the bathroom to call police. Knotek's sisters, Nikki and Sammy, are now in their mid-40s and both live in the Seattle area, while their sister Tori needed a change of scenery, so she moved to Colorado. David Knotek was paroled in 2018, and he has been forgiven by his children. The children all have contact with David, but not with Shelly. They contend without Shelly's influence that he is a changed man. The girls are all now reported to be in great relationships with great jobs, some even with children of their own. But Shelly Knotek remains a terrifying presence for all three women, and her impending release a source of terror.
Good Lord.
And that is the story of Shelly Knotek.
Good Lord. And she's what, like a 60-something-year-old woman now?
Yeah, I think that's about right. But I'm with the girls. I would be terrified with her upcoming release too.
Yeah. Well, she's capable of murder.
She is capable of murder, and not only that, but she's also capable of being the really, really nice, sweet person in 1 minute and then turn on you the next minute.
And convince the entire world that you're the bad guy.
Right.
And people apparently believe her.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm with those girls that I think it's terrifying that she's been released. I know that they have tried to keep her in prison but she's up. She's up for release in June. There's no stopping it at this point. Yep. She served her time at that point. So that is my sad story for this week.
Well, awesome.
It's never good that we have to end on such tragedy. As I said, I don't have anything positive to end with today. I'm sorry about that. So.
Well, it's upstate Washington. That's where they filmed Twin Peaks. So there you go. There's that.
Upstate Washington. It's probably a nice area to live in.
Yeah.
If you're not living with Shelly Knotek.
Yes.
So that'll take us to the end of another recording week. As always, you can find us on nerderymurdery.com, where you can find the link to all of our podcast platforms, as well as our contact information and social media accounts. So if you want to tell us things you like about the show, things you don't like about the show, if you want to tell us about things you want to hear, we love doing listener episodes. You can find the link to our merchandise on our website, where if you want to show off your nerdery and murdery fandom, you can certainly get something there. You can find the link to our Patreon, where if you wish to donate to our show, you can do so. We do appreciate each and every one of our patrons.
Please and thank you.
As a reminder, we do have patron-exclusive episodes that are found on our patron site. So if you become a patron like our current ones, you also can get extra episodes that are only available to our patrons.
That is correct.
And so with that,
I have been Zig with your nerdery.
and I'm Jeffrey with your murdery.
Cue the music.